My sister called at 5:47 on a Friday morning to tell me our father was dead. He was standing at my kitchen counter in wool socks, scraping orange marmalade across a piece of toast with the concentration of a man repairing a fuse box. "Tessa," Bethany said, her voice dry and efficient, "Dad passed during the night. Gavin and I are handling everything. He left the house, the accounts, all of it to us. There's nothing for you." A man breathed close to her phone. Then my brother-in-law gave a low laugh and said, "Looks like the disappearing daughter finally got what she earned." Across the counter, Samuel Morgan, 76 years old, furious and very much alive, set down his toast. He leaned toward my phone. I covered the microphone before he could speak, because we had spent 4 days preparing for that call and 2 months learning why patience could be sharper than anger. His eyes locked on mine. He mouthed 6 words that Bethany would not hear until Sunday afternoon, standing beneath a framed photograph at the memorial she had arranged for him. Bethany exhaled as if my grief were an administrative burden. "That isn't important now. The service is Sunday at the Railway Lodge, 2:00. Don't turn it into a scene." She hung up before I could ask how a dead man had managed to leave a new will while hidden in a facility 3 counties away. 9 months earlier, none of us knew there would be a memorial. We were still pretending our family had merely grown busy. I was 38 then, working temporary contracts as a respiratory therapist. I went where hospitals were short-staffed and winter air was trying to kill everyone with weak lungs. 8 weeks in Cleveland, 12 in Richmond, 10 in Harrisburg. The work paid better than a permanent position, and I told myself the constant moving was practical. I had graduate school debt, a small apartment in Pittsburgh, and an old habit of leaving before anyone could decide I had failed them. My father lived in Millstone, Pennsylvania, in the same narrow brick house where Bethany and I had grown up. He had spent 41 years maintaining signal systems for the railroad, walking miles of track in sleet, July heat, and darkness, with a tool bag banging against his leg. He could diagnose a bad relay by sound. He could rebuild a porch without measuring twice. He could also ignore chest pain for 6 hours because he did not want to miss the end of a baseball game. My mother, Rosemary, had been dead for almost 3 years. After she died, Dad kept her blue ceramic sugar bowl on the kitchen table even though he used artificial sweetener. Every evening he switched on the small lamp above the sink because Mom had believed a dark kitchen made a house feel abandoned. He never said he missed her. He simply kept performing the little tasks that proved he did. Bethany lived 18 minutes away with Gavin in a new house built to look old. She was 6 years older than me and had spent most of our lives turning proximity into evidence of devotion. She took Dad to church suppers. She posted photographs on holidays. She knew which pharmacy he used and which pie he bought at the farmer's market. I knew the medication that could make his blood pressure crash and the exact pause in his voice that meant he was afraid. The trouble began on a wet September afternoon when Dad slipped from the second step of a folding ladder while clearing leaves from a gutter. He landed on the concrete walk and fractured his left hip. The surgery went well. The surgeon used words like routine and favorable. Dad used stronger language about hospital food. I was finishing a contract outside Raleigh. I drove through the night and reached Millstone before morning rounds. Bethany was already in his room, wearing a cream sweater and a worried expression that looked professionally arranged. Gavin stood by the window talking quietly with a discharge coordinator. Dad, pale from anesthesia, lifted 2 fingers in a weak salute. "My lung mechanic," he said. "Tell them I'm too stubborn for complications." I checked his oxygen, reviewed the medications, asked about physical therapy, and requested a copy of the discharge plan. Gavin answered before the nurse could. "I handle closings every day," he said. "A few forms won't defeat me." Gavin Price worked in commercial property finance. He wore tailored jackets even in waiting rooms and spoke in the soft, reassuring tone of a man who expected signatures to follow. He was handsome in a polished, forgettable way. He remembered birthdays, sent expensive wine, and never entered a room without calculating who held the leverage. Dad would need 6 to 8 weeks of help. Bethany offered their guest suite. I offered to pause my next contract and stay at his house. "No," Dad said immediately. "You just paid off the last of those loans. Don't throw away work because I lost a wrestling match with gravity." I looked at Dad. He looked exhausted. "Just until I'm W. Alking without that contraption," he said, nodding at the walker. A week after discharge, Gavin arranged a limited power of attorney so he could pay Dad's utilities, manage insurance claims, and deposit checks while Dad recovered. I read it over a video call. It was specific. It expired after 90 days. Dad signed with a notary at Bethany's dining room table while I watched on a screen. There was nothing sinister in the document. That mattered later. Harm rarely announces itself with black gloves and a crowbar. Sometimes it arrives with highlighted tabs and a casserole cooling on the counter. At first, Dad sounded like himself. He complained about the walker. He mocked Gavin's coffee. He called me every Sunday and described physical therapy as organized humiliation. Then, gradually, our calls shortened. By November, I was working nights in Richmond. My hours were upside down, and that made me easy to manage. I called at noon. Bethany said Dad was resting. I called after dinner. She said he had gone to bed. I texted. The messages showed delivered, never read. His old phone had supposedly stopped charging. I bought him a simple new one, programmed my number, and mailed it to Bethany's house. She said the package arrived damaged. I sent another by tracked delivery. Bethany claimed he refused it because the screen caused headaches. My father spent 4 decades reading signal diagrams under fluorescent lights. A 5-inch phone screen was not his enemy. I began to push harder. I asked for the name of his physical therapist. Bethany said I was being controlling. I asked when he planned to return home. Gavin told me the house needed repairs first. I asked what repairs. He said moisture remediation in the basement, electrical concerns, accessibility improvements. When I said that, he laughed gently. "Tessa, hospitals make you suspicious. Not every family decision is a clinical emergency." I had spent my adult life entering rooms during other people's worst hours. I knew how to be useful when someone could not breathe. I knew how to interpret blood gases, calm a terrified patient, and tell a family when hope needed to change shape. At home, usefulness became harder to measure. Bethany had always said I made everything a problem to solve. Dad had once told me, during an argument after Mom's funeral, that I used work as a respectable form of hiding. So when Bethany accused me of creating drama from a distance, I questioned my instincts instead of questioning her access. At Thanksgiving, Dad sat at the far end of Bethany's table in a high-backed chair that made him look like a guest. He had lost weight. Bethany served tiny portions and called every restriction doctor's orders without naming the doctor. After dinner, I found him alone in the mudroom struggling with his coat. Outside, he admitted Gavin had moved all banking online and refused to share the passwords. The limited authority was supposed to expire in December. I offered to take Dad home that night, but he said Bethany was trying and warned that I came into problems like a fire alarm. The words hurt because there was truth in them. I had arrived angry, already planning an extraction. Dad was still recovering. He hated conflict. I let his reluctance become permission for my retreat. Inside, I asked Gavin to print Dad's statements and every document signed since September. His smile held. "Are you accusing us of stealing?" I repeated that I had asked for statements. Bethany heard that and began to cry. Not loudly. Bethany's tears were quiet and devastating, the kind that made everyone else feel crude. She listed the appointments she had driven to, the laundry she had done, the nights Dad had called for help. By the time she finished, my request for bank records sounded like an attack on sainthood. On the highway, I stopped at a rest area and cried in my car, furious with them, with myself, with the possibility that both sides of the argument contained something true. Then I drove back to Richmond and signed another 10-week contract. I started sending letters because Bethany could not interrupt paper. I wrote about patience, weather, and ordinary things. I never received an answer. In February, I drove to Millstone unannounced. Bethany blocked her doorway and claimed Dad was at a veterans' breakfast that had somehow lasted until late afternoon. I drove to Dad's house on Briarwood Drive. The porch light was off. Flyers bulged from the mailbox. A brown patch of leaves lay pasted to the front walk. Through the side window, I could see Mom's blue sugar bowl still on the table and the lamp above the sink dark. Our neighbor, Pearl Ashby, came across the street in slippers and a raincoat. She was 81, sharp-eyed, and constitutionally unable to mind her own business, which made her one of the most valuable people in Millstone. "I haven't seen your father since before Christmas," she said. "Your sister's husband comes by and takes boxes." Out, I did see a medical van collect Sam in December. Bethany admitted only that he had gone for an evaluation, then refused to give me an address. I sat in my car outside the dark house and searched every rehabilitation center and assisted living facility within 50 miles. I called 9. Privacy laws prevented most from confirming anything. 2 said they had no resident by his name. 1 put me on hold for 12 minutes and returned with a rehearsed denial that sounded almost like fear. Then Gavin called me back. He sounded wounded, reasonable, tired. Dad had experienced confusion after a medication change, he explained. There had been a short evaluation, nothing serious. Dad was back with them and embarrassed. My surprise visit had agitated everyone. If I continued harassing Bethany, they would consider legal boundaries. 3 minutes later, Bethany texted me a photograph. Dad sat in a gray recliner holding a newspaper. He looked tired but alert. The message said, "He is fine. Stop making this about you." I zoomed in until the picture blurred. On the wall behind him hung a round clock shaped like a ship's wheel. It showed 3:18. I did not understand then why that detail mattered. When my contract ended in April, I declined the next one. I plan to drive to Millstone and refuse to leave without seeing him. The night before I left, a former coworker named Marisol Vega called and carefully asked whether Samuel Morgan was my father. Marisol and I had worked together at a pulmonary rehab unit in Erie. She was 54, practical, unsentimental, and incapable of ignoring a badly documented medication order. She now supervised nights at Birch Ridge Senior Residence, a facility near the New York border. There's a man here under that name. He asks every new respiratory therapist whether they know a Tessa who works in hospitals. He says you're his daughter. He has been here since December 17th. When I asked why she was worried, Marisol said, "Because he's fully oriented, he walks with a cane, and he keeps saying he never agreed to permanent placement. His chart says family requested memory support, but there is no diagnosis of dementia, no capacity evaluation, and no physician order that explains why he's on a locked wing." The drive from Pittsburgh took almost 3 hours. I remember none of the scenery. I remember the pressure of my hands on the steering wheel and the way guilt kept offering me dramatic conclusions. You abandoned him. You chose money. You ignored every sign because action would have cost you something. The truth was more complicated and less flattering. I had been manipulated. I had also been afraid to look unreasonable. Both things could be true. Birch Ridge sat beyond a strip mall and a closed skating rink. The sign at the entrance promised dignity, independence, and compassionate care. Inside, one aide hurried between 2 call lights while a television played to an empty lounge. The air smelled of bleach, reheated soup, and laundry that had never fully dried. Dad was sitting by a window with a paperback open in his lap. He wore a red flannel shirt I did not recognize. His face looked narrower, but when he saw me, his eyes sharpened with the old current. "The hospital finally released my daughter," he said. I crossed the room and knelt beside him. He smelled like institutional soap. "They said you knew," he whispered. "They said you approved this." I told him I had not known where he was. Dad's phone had never broken. Gavin took it to update the plan and did not return it. Dad never saw either replacement I mailed. My letters were not in his room. Bethany had told him I had accepted a permanent position in Arizona and wanted distance. When he asked to call me, she said I was working critical shifts and had begged not to be disturbed. In December, Bethany told him Birch Ridge was a 2-week rehabilitation stay while Gavin repaired the stairs at home. The 2 weeks became a month, then another. Each time Dad demanded to leave, the staff said the responsible party needed to approve transportation. Gavin had submitted documents naming himself financial and medical agent. I tested him anyway, not because I doubted him, but because I needed objective ground beneath us. He named the date, the governor, his medications, the route from Millstone to Pittsburgh. He recalled the final score of a baseball game from 3 nights earlier and corrected me on the year the railroad merged 2 divisions. At the administration office, a man named Leonard Finch told me Dad could not be discharged without Gavin's authorization. I put my license card on his desk. I work in health care. I also know the county ombudsman's number. My father is alert, oriented, and requesting discharge. You can produce the legal authority preventing him from leaving, or we can review his entire intake file with the state this evening. Dad had been admitted as a voluntary resident through a financial P. Power of attorney signed in November. The document granted Gavin broad authority over banking, real estate, medical placement, and legal decisions. Dad studied the signature and said, "That is not mine." 28 minutes later, Dad signed his own discharge paperwork. His hand was steady. He pressed the pen hard enough to leave an impression on the pages beneath. Marisol packed his medications, found his old belt in a laundry cart, and slipped 2 oatmeal cookies into his coat pocket. The facility called Gavin while we were still in the parking lot. He insisted Dad was unsafe and accused me of manipulation. Dad replied, "I was competent enough when you needed signatures," and ended the call. I brought him to my apartment in Pittsburgh. It was small, on the 3rd floor, and full of furniture chosen by someone who was rarely there. Dad slept in my bedroom. I took the couch. He complained about my coffee, inspected the radiator, and asked why I owned 3 lamps but no proper toolbox. At the bank, the branch manager printed 6 months of statements. $163,000 had vanished. 38,000 labeled care reimbursement, 74,000 transferred to Gavin's GPR holdings, and 51,000 gone toward overdue loans on Bethany and Gavin's lake property. The branch manager also found a pending home equity application against the Briarwood house for $120,000. The form carried Dad's signature, dated March 9th, when Dad had already spent nearly 3 months at Birch Ridge. Less than $22,000 remained in his accounts. "Your mother saved grocery coupons for 30 years, he said. "I took every overtime shift they offered. We skipped vacations. We paid that house off twice if you count the interest, and they turned it into a drawer they thought they could open." I wanted revenge immediately. Dad wanted his name back. We hired Dana Keene, an elder law attorney recommended by Marisol's union representative. Dana was 60, compact, silver-haired, and so calm that nervous people began confessing around her simply to fill the silence. "Your first document was valid and narrow," she said. "The second is broad, notarized, and almost certainly fraudulent. We revoke everything today. We freeze the equity line. We notify the bank's fraud department. We report financial exploitation. Then we prepare for retaliation." By afternoon, Dad had signed a notarized revocation. Copies went to the bank, the county recorder, Birch Ridge, his insurance carrier, and the mortgage lender. The pending loan was frozen. Dana filed reports with Adult Protective Services and the district attorney's financial crimes unit. "The transfers may be recoverable," she said. "Criminal intent is harder. Gavin will say your father authorized them verbally. Bethany will say she believed the documents were valid. The forged power of attorney is strong evidence, but they may blame the notary or call it a clerical error." Dana then produced a will dated March 23rd. Under it, Dad left the house, truck, accounts, tools, and personal property to Bethany and Gavin. I received $1 in acknowledgement of prolonged estrangement. 2 witnesses had signed. One was an employee at Gavin's office. The other name was unfamiliar. Dana explained that the bank had received a copy when Gavin inquired about the home equity line, apparently to demonstrate future control of the property. When I asked whether they could use it, she said, "Not while your father is alive. But if they believe he is dead, They may present it immediately before anyone examines the rest. My old key still opened the back door of the Briarwood house. Inside, drawers stood open. File boxes were missing from the den. Mom's jewelry case sat empty on the bedroom dresser. Dad's railroad service watch was gone. Someone had unplugged the lamp above the kitchen sink. Under the stairs was a locked steel cabinet Dad had bolted to the wall years ago. Gavin had tried to pry it open and failed. Dad removed a key from inside the lining of his old work boot. The cabinet held the original deed, tax records, his union pension documents, my parents' marriage certificate, and a folder of signature samples dating back decades. Dad had been a union steward. He signed incident reports, safety petitions, and grievance forms in ink that dug into paper. The differences were obvious once she pointed them out. Dad's capital S leaned forward. The final stroke in Morgan always hooked beneath the line. The forged versions were smooth and careful, created by someone drawing a name instead of writing it. The broad power of attorney had been notarized at 10:40 on November 14th in Millstone. Dad's orthopedic records showed he was undergoing a procedure at 10:40 that morning in Pittsburgh, 63 miles away. Nurses had documented his presence every 15 minutes. The will was dated March 23rd. Birch R. Ige visitor logs showed no visitors that day, and hallway camera records, still available because Marisol requested preservation, showed Dad never left the locked wing. Dad sat at the kitchen table, surrounded by proof that his daughter and son-in-law had tried to erase him using his own name. Then he asked Dana what would happen if they tried to use the forged will publicly after believing he had died. I'm not asking you to improvise. I'm asking what happens if someone knowingly presents a forged will after being told the person is dead. Dana studied him. It becomes evidence of attempted fraud. Depending on where and how it is presented, it may also support conspiracy and forgery charges. No false death certificate, she said. No insurance claim. No report to government. No one lies to law enforcement. I will not participate in fabricating an official death. Dana pointed a pen at him. And if you stage something theatrical, I do not know about it until it becomes relevant to my client's legal protection. Dad's closest friend was Calvin Rourke, 78, the retired owner of Millstone's funeral home. He heard the plan, stared at Dad for a long moment, and agreed to make one private call. The plan depended on suggestion, not official deception. Calvin would call Bethany and say Dad had collapsed while visiting an old friend and was gone. If she asked where the body was, he would say arrangements were being handled privately. The Railroad Retirees Association would host a memorial at its lodge on Sunday, supposedly because Dad had requested simplicity. There would be no obituary, no death notice, no certificate, no insurance contact, and no statement to any government office. Dana would attend the memorial as Dad's attorney, though Bethany would not know that. The financial crimes investigator assigned to the bank report agreed to remain nearby if the forged will appeared and was publicly asserted as genuine. The idea frightened me, not because I thought Bethany and Gavin would grieve. By then, I knew better. I was afraid the spectacle would make Dad look unstable and me look vindictive. I had spent months doubting myself because they called concern control. Now we were planning something so dramatic it could be used as proof of every accusation. "We can stop," I told Dad. "We have evidence. We can let the legal process work." And while it works, they tell everyone I was confused. They tell the town you kidnapped me. They say the money was permission. They didn't just take money, Tess. Money can come back or not. They took my voice, put me behind a locked door and told everyone it was care. Told you I didn't want you. Told me you were too busy to want me. If I walk quietly into a lawyer's office and wait 2 years, maybe I win. But they keep the story. I want them to meet the man they buried. On Thursday evening, Calvin made the call from his kitchen. Dad and I sat across from him. The phone lay on the table between 3 cups of coffee. "Bethany, I'm afraid I have terrible news about your father. He collapsed earlier tonight. We couldn't bring him back. Sam is gone." After 3 silent seconds, Bethany asked whether Dad had a bag or papers with him, then who was handling the estate. She never asked if he had suffered. 26 minutes later, according to records obtained afterward, Gavin called the lender processing the home equity application and left a message asking whether death of the borrower would delay disbursement. The next morning, Bethany called me with the same cold announcement. Dad leaned toward the muted phone and mouthed, "You mistook silence for surrender." I told her I would attend Sunday's service. Bethany posted a black-and-white photograph of Dad on social media with a long message about being beside him through his final months. The photograph showed him in the gray recliner, holding the same newspaper from the picture she had sent me in February. Every supposed update she had sent for months came from one afternoon. She had staged a stack of proof-of-life images before moving him to Birch Ridge. At 6, Bethany called Calvin and asked whether there would be an opportunity for family to address estate matters during the memorial. Dad spent Saturday evening polishing his work boots instead of dress shoes. They were black leather, worn smooth at the toes, the pair he had used for union meetings after retirement. My chest tightened. My hands went numb. I imagined Dad walking into the lodge and collapsing. I imagined Gavin turning the room against us. I imagined Bethany crying, and every person deciding cruelty looked more like my restraint than her tears. When the panic passed, I looked at my reflection and understood something I had resisted for years. Being calm did not mean being certain. Courage was not confidence. Sometimes it was simply refusing to let fear make the final decision. The Millstone Railway Lodge stood beside an abandoned spur inn at the edge of town. Inside were rows of folding chairs, framed photographs of locomotives, a brass bell from the old station, and a memorial table arranged beneath Dad's Union portrait. Calvin had placed white irises in tall vases because Mom had disliked them. There was no body and no casket. Calvin had explained that Dad wanted no viewing and that the memorial would precede private arrangements. Instead, a cedar tool chest sat at the front beneath the portrait, closed and polished, symbolizing the work that had defined his life. Inside, it were nothing but old railway bolts. Dad waited with me in a storage room behind the small stage. A narrow gap beside the curtain gave us a view of the hall. People came in slowly at first, then in groups. Retired rail workers, neighbors, church members who had known Mom, former apprentices Dad had trained. Pearl wore a purple coat and carried a lemon cake. Marisol sat near the back. Dana took a chair along the side wall with her briefcase beside her boot. Bethany arrived in black wearing Mom's pearl necklace. Gavin followed in a dark suit with a leather portfolio, accepting condolences like deposits. At 2, Calvin stepped to the microphone. Sam Morgan spent his life making sure other people arrived safely, he began. He maintained signals, trained younger workers, and believed every warning light meant something. Before we share memories, his family has asked to clarify his final wishes. Gavin took the microphone before anyone shared a memory. Bethany positioned herself beside the memorial table. My father-in-law believed family meant responsibility, Gavin said. Bethany and I carried that responsibility during his decline. In March, while still of sound mind, Samuel executed a new will. It leaves his home, financial accounts, vehicle, and personal property to Bethany and me in recognition of the care we provided. My sister-in-law, Tessa, is acknowledged with a nominal bequest because of her prolonged absence and lack of involvement. Gavin continued. We do not share this to create conflict. We share it because some people may attempt to challenge a dying man's wishes after failing him in life. For one sick moment, I was back outside Dad's dark house, wondering whether I had failed him. Then Calvin asked Gavin to confirm the signing date. Gavin did, stating that Dad had signed in his office before 2 witnesses. A side curtain moved. Dad stepped into the hall wearing a charcoal jacket, a blue work shirt, and the polished black boots. His silver hair was combed back. His cane struck the wooden floor once, then again, each sound carrying through the silence. Pearl dropped her cake plate. Someone gasped. Marisol covered her mouth, laughing and crying at once. Gavin froze with the forged will still raised. Dad reached the microphone and said, "You mistook silence for surrender." Those were the words he had spoken into my muted phone 2 mornings earlier. Heard now, in the room where Bethany and Gavin had tried to convert his death into ownership, they sounded less like a threat than a diagnosis. "This is outrageous," he said. "Samuel is confused. He left a secured care facility. Tessa removed him without authorization and manipulated him into this performance. He has periods of lucidity. That doesn't mean he understands his finances. We were pursuing guardianship for his protection." "Which home?" he asked. "Yours, where my phone disappeared. Birch Ridge, where you left me behind a locked door. Or mine, where your husband changed the locks yesterday." I walked down the aisle carrying the evidence. Dana joined us and asked Gavin for the will. He refused, so she began laying out the real documents on the memorial table. This document revoked all prior agency authority on April 28th and was delivered to every relevant institution. The home equity application is frozen. The bank has opened a fraud investigation. Samuel Morgan was admitted to Birch Ridge on December 17th without a diagnosis of incapacity. He remained there until April 27th. He requested discharge and signed for himself. The broad power of attorney you used was notarized in Millstone on November 14th at 10:40 a.m. At that exact time, Mr. Morgan was undergoing a documented procedure in Pittsburgh. He could not have appeared before the notary. $163,000 was removed from his accounts. $74,000 went to GPR Holdings, registered to Gavin Price. $51,000 serviced debt on property owned by Gavin and Bethany Price. And this document, dated March 23rd, was supposedly signed in your office while Mr. Morgan was residing on a locked wing more than 100 miles away. Facility logs show no visit and no authorized leave. Dad asked, "If I approved everything, why did you need my dead signature?" "This is a misunderstanding. Sam approved investments. He wanted us secure. He said fam. Wiley should benefit while he was alive." One of the men in the third row stood abruptly. Owen Pike, a junior analyst from Gavin's office. I recognized his name from the will. "I witnessed it," he said, staring at the floor. "But Gavin told me Sam had signed earlier. He said witnesses were only confirming delivery. I never met Mr. Morgan." Bethany insisted she had only been protecting everyone from conflict. "Conflict," I said. My voice surprised me with its calm. "You put him in a locked facility and told each of us the other had agreed. That is not conflict management. That is isolation." Bethany finally admitted the lake house was underwater and Gavin's business was collapsing. "Dad had money sitting there while we were drowning," she said. Gavin had borrowed against future deals that failed. Their vacation property lost value. Credit cards covered payments. Bethany's salon had closed after a partner dispute. By the time Dad fell, their life was a painted room with no floor beneath it. "Sam, listen to me. We made mistakes because we were scared, but I kept you safe. I paid bills. I arranged care. Tessa was gone. She came in at the end and turned you against the people who stayed." The lodge doors opened. Two investigators entered with a county detective, walking with the slow certainty of people whose authority did not need performance. "Mr. Price, we need to speak with you regarding the forged power of attorney, bank transfers, and the attempted loan against Mr. Morgan's property." The detective asked Gavin to come with him. He kept talking about temporary transfers and verbal authorization as they led him away. Bethany remained by the memorial table. For the first time, she looked less like a villain than a woman who had followed one compromise into another until she no longer recognized the distance traveled. That did not excuse her. It made the loss more painful. Bethany asked whether I was happy. The question struck an old place in me. She had always made my boundaries sound like cruelty, my success like abandonment, my anger like envy. I said, "I found Dad in a locked hallway asking strangers whether they knew me. There is nothing here to be happy about." Dad stepped between us, not to protect her, not to protect me, but to end the familiar pattern of daughters arguing over the meaning of him. "This is not a contest," he said. "I am not a prize, I am not an account. I was alive the entire time." Bethany whispered that she was sorry. Dad answered, "You are sorry the room knows. I hope one day you become sorry I knew." The memorial did not end like a victory celebration. People stood in small groups, stunned and embarrassed by how completely they had accepted the story of Bethany's sacrifice. Some apologized to Dad. Others avoided him because apology would require admitting they had praised his captivity. The locksmith Gavin hired had replaced the front lock, but the county detective had authorized us to secure the property. We used our own locksmith and kept the invoice, photographs, and video. The house still felt violated. Drawers remained open. Dust marked the places where objects had been taken. Mom's necklace was with Bethany. The railroad watch was missing. Yet the light above the sink changed something. The room no longer looked abandoned. It looked occupied by a man who had returned to his own life. Gavin was charged with forgery, financial exploitation, theft, and falsifying loan documents. His finance license was revoked, his company entered receivership, and Dad recovered $129,000 through restitution and asset recovery. He never recovered Mom's railroad anniversary necklace. Bethany said it had been sold for cash. That loss hurt him more than the money. Bethany accepted a plea for facilitating the exploitation and falsifying care information. She received probation, restitution, counseling, and community service at a senior meal program. For 6 months, he had no contact with Bethany except through lawyers and the probation office. I supported that boundary, though part of me wanted a permanent door slammed hard enough to echo through generations. I started therapy and admitted that travel work had been freedom, money, and avoidance braided together. I knew how to respond to emergencies. Steady presence frightened me more. Dad never asked me to quit traveling. I chose a permanent position in Pittsburgh because I wanted my weeks to contain people I could see again. I visited Millstone every Sunday. Sometimes Dad drove to me. We learned how to be family without using crisis as glue. He gave me access to his medical portal, but kept his own password. I became backup agent, not primary controller. Dana created a trust with independent oversight for major transactions. Dad reviewed every bank statement monthly. He chose a professional fiduciary for anything involving property if he became incapacitated. Calvin and Dad began monthly workshops at the railway lodge called Keep Your Name on Your Life. Dana explained powers of attorney. Marisol taught the difference between assistance and incapacity, and a bank manager showed people how to set transaction alerts. 8 months later, Bethany wrote a letter admitting the first transfer had been a supposed bridge loan. She confessed to taking Dad's phone, intercepting my letters, approving Birch Ridge because he had begun asking questions, and staging the photographs. I kept waiting to feel like the person doing this, she wrote. Instead, every step felt like something I had almost no choice but to continue. At the end, Bethany did not ask forgiveness. She asked whether she could one day apologize in person without expecting a relationship. At a supervised meeting, Bethany looked older and made no attempt to perform. I took your money. I took your phone. I lied to Tessa and told you she chose work over you. I signed your name on the care forms. I knew the will was false before Gavin read it. I helped because I was afraid of losing my house and my marriage, and then I became more afraid of anyone knowing what I had done. I called Tessa before sunrise to tell her she had nothing because I wanted to make the lie feel finished. Dad set strict conditions. Restitution, continued counseling, no access to his finances, home, records, or keys, no surprise visits, and only brief meetings in neutral places. You made me doubt whether he wanted me, I said. I can understand fear. I cannot understand choosing that particular cruelty over and over. No contact eventually became limited contact, not reconciliation. Punishment seeks pain. A boundary protects what pain has taught you not to surrender. Marisol came to Sunday dinners whenever her schedule allowed. Calvin brought terrible wine and stories Dad claimed were exaggerated. Pearl crossed the street without knocking and criticized my pie crust. Dana attended one workshop, stayed for coffee, and somehow became part of the group. For most of my life, I thought family was the set of people who knew your childhood. After everything happened, I began to understand family as the people who do not require your silence to remain comfortable. One evening, we sat in the Briarwood kitchen under Mom's lamp. The blue sugar bowl remained between us. Dad had recovered most of his weight. His hips still ached before rain. His bank account was smaller, but his life felt larger than it had before the fall. He opened his wallet and showed me a folded scrap of paper. It was the tracking receipt from the second phone I had mailed him, the one Bethany claimed he refused. Marisol had found it in a box of belongings sent from Birch Ridge. For months, I had treated my absence as proof that I loved him less. Bethany had used that shame because it was already available. The truth was not that distance never mattered. It did. Presence matters. Calls matter. Questions matter. Showing up matters. But love is not measured only in miles. It is measured in whether you respect another person's voice when that voice becomes inconvenient. The morning my sister called to say he was dead, she believed she was announcing the conclusion. She thought the estate was settled, the troublesome daughter expelled, the old man reduced to papers she controlled. A signature is not a person. Care is not control. Proximity is not loyalty. Tears are not truth. And silence, especially from someone who has spent a lifetime choosing his words carefully, is not surrender. Dad still lives on Briarwood Drive. Every evening he turns on the lamp above the sink. Every month he reviews his accounts. Every Sunday I drive down from Pittsburgh and he burns toast while insisting the toaster is poorly engineered. Sometimes Bethany meets him at a diner halfway between Millstone and her apartment. Their relationship is not restored. It is being rebuilt under supervision, one honest conversation at a time, with no guarantee of what shape it will take. Mine with her remains distant. That distance is not bitterness. It is the space where trust would have to grow. On my last visit, Dad placed a white iris on the kitchen sill. When I reminded him Mom hated them, he said, "Surviving a bad memory lets you choose what it means next." That is what I learned from the father who attended his own memorial. Dignity is not winning the room. It is refusing to disappear inside someone else's version of your life. Boundaries are not revenge. They are the locks you choose after someone has used your open door as permission. And real family, by blood or by choice, is made of people who protect your voice, not people waiting to inherit your silence. Share this story with someone who may need the courage to check the papers, ask the difficult question, or trust the warning in their own chest. Tell us in the comments what boundary changed your life. Subscribe for more stories about truth after betrayal, and join me again in the next episode.